Intramuros for me is, I would say, the soul of our country. My name is Paulo Mercado. I'm the founder and president of the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines. This is an advocacy group that we set up about 2 years ago to promote the creative industries, both in the public and private sector. So, yung concept of creative economy essentially is taking a look at the contribution of the totality of creative industries and creative individuals to the national economy. So, and to our thrust is to get the government to recognize it as a priority strategic sector and support it with, let's say, incentives or from the private sector investments that would make it grow faster. So I wish for Intramuros in the near future to become the country's most iconic creative hub.
When I started out with the Department of Tourism, we wanted the theme, or to be the overarching theme, to be a culture of sustainable tourism. And what's good with Intramuros Administration is that we should preserve it because it's a historical and a cultural site. And Intramuros is what we can call one of our national treasures. And I want the Intramuros, the district of Intramuros, it's not where you go for field trips or weddings or photo shoots. It should be a place where everybody would like to go to enjoy the sights, and it's like a place where it's like going back in time. Intramuros is a place, I think, that a living urban heritage district. It's where you have history and culture come to life. I'm Bernadette Romulo Puyat. I'm the Secretary of Tourism and also the Chairperson of the Intramuros Administration. Intramuros should promote the cultures and values of malasakit and malikain.
It was a very exciting time. That's what I remember most. I was on a holiday and I got a frantic call. Where are you anyway? They have been looking for you. And I said, what about? Having a restoration force as big as Intramuros was at the time didn't exist anywhere in the country. When we came into Intramuros to work, what are we restoring? We do not know. How did it look, except for the ruined walls? That's why we have to dig pictures and pictures and pictures just to be able to provide a background and tell people this is important, this part of the walls look like this. Everything was something that came to us by a calling, you'd say, that we have to do it right. Intramuros is a beautiful memory of the past. It is like a microcosm of all things good and bad. There are many good stories about Filipinos, people who headed the construction of the walls, and they were Indios. The carvers were Filipinos also. People should follow the regulations more, and that they should not seek exemption all the time. And this applies to both government, church, and private owners. Ana Esperanza Bunag Cartunton. I was hired I would say I was one of the first employed in the Intramuros Administration structure, and that was pretty 1979. You have many people saying that Intramuros should not be preserved because it is a colonial memory and that should be erased. I don't think so. It represents failure. It represents achievement. So it's about time that our people should see Intramuros is not just a symbol of colonialization, but a symbol of our spirit to rise above that.
Culture is about what human beings have been able to develop for themselves, no? In terms of artifacts, in terms of knowledge, in terms of traditions and customs. As an educational institution, knowledge is something that we deal with, and of course, if that's devoid of context in terms of the traditions of the people, of the needs of the people, in terms of the artifacts that we find around us, including technological artifacts, then it will be empty. So education must be infused with a lot of culture. So that's how I would tie them all together.
Intramuros is valuable not only for me but for the whole of the Bureau of Treasury, because it's a convergence between the distant past and the present. Over the short span that I have served as the treasurer, I have seen how, through the efforts of the Intramuros Administration, places like Fort Santiago, the surrounding walls and gardens, the old churches, and the plazas have become vibrant attractions, showcasing the old alongside the new. So indeed, Intramuros is on the rise. I'm Rosalia De Leon. I'm currently the Treasurer of the Philippines, and I've been working here in Intramuros since 2013. Well, personally, Intramuros is important again to me because I find solace after hard day's work. But remembering my childhood, our family would always hear masses in the Manila Cathedral, particularly during Easter Sundays, no? And just the same, there are also times when here in the Treasury, when our jobs will be very demanding, but as we see the surroundings of Intramuros, some sort of takes away, all this stress and reminds us of how lucky we are to be in this place, surrounded by the history of the Philippines around us. I hope that this treasure of ours could be preserved for the generations to come. I hope that we would not be detached, so we could reach out to more people and instill in them a deep sense of our history, the richness of our culture, and a deep sense of the very rich heritage that we have inherited from our forefathers.
Well, Intramuros for me is many things because my father used to work in the port area, in Bonifacio Drive in port area. So even as a small boy, I really knew Intramuros already back in the 50s. And I was very happy to have been appointed administrator in 1989. And that really involved me more with the history of Intramuros and the plans for its further development. It would be very important that we know where we came from, and I think that's the special value of Intramuros. But even in modern times, there could be, or there should be, and as it's happening now, other developments here in Intramuros. I'm Jose Capistrano Jr., formerly administrator of Intramuros. Well, as what's happening now, Escuela Taller assists in the restoration of heritage structures through our training of out-of-school youth in the various arts and crafts of heritage restoration. And I think this is important to preserve our historical and heritage structures, and at the same time also reach out to other parts of the country for the same purpose.
Every great and important city has an old town. Intramuros to me is Manila's old town. I have always been awed by Intramuros. It seems like when I'm coming here, there is an excitement that you feel that what happened in this place. There is something so sacred, so noble, so precious about Intramuros. I named it after my grandmother, Barbara, to just give it a Spanish flavor. And for some years, after a few years, we decided to really gear towards heritage so that people will see and know what is heritage, what is sinauna, yung kinaugalian natin, yung traditions natin, which will be seen in our cuisine and in our performances, in the dance that we present here in Barbara's. I would attribute it to my mom, to my mother, who taught me the value of work, the value of excellence, the value of feeding people in style and giving them satisfaction. I would want to happen that Intramuros will be remembered by every person who comes to this place because of its uniqueness, its sacredness, its history, its everything. There is so much here. I'm Barbara Gordon de los Reyes of Barbara's Heritage Restaurant. I have been in Intramuros for the past 30 years, which has been a great part of my work, my joys. It's like an adventure.
For me, Intramuros is our past, present, and our future. And because of that, it is very important in our lives. We must be involved and engaged in Intramuros, and we as citizens must do everything to keep it alive, to keep it vibrant, because it is the archive of our history. It is the archive of who we are as a people. Well, I'm Olivia Limpeao. I'm the President and CEO of Distillery Limtuaco and the 5th generation master blender and distiller of the oldest distillery in the Philippines. So our company was established in 1852, and our founder is Don Bonifacio Limtuaco, who came from China, Fujian, China, and he introduced to the Philippines this product called Shok Hok Tong, which eventually became the generic term for Chinese medicinal wine, shoktong. And so we are very much part of the history of the Philippines through our liquor making with 167 years of history and legacy that we have shared with this country. Well, Intramuros is very important because this was really the seat of governmental power and trade, culture, religion, and we're very proud to be part of Intramuros now through our museum. While our role in Intramuros is really to provide another tourist spot, another tourist spot where through our museum, tourists can learn more about our country, about our products, about our industry. And we're very proud to be given that opportunity to participate, in promoting culture through food. Well, I would really love that Intramuros would be teeming with tourists, with young people working in this place, celebrating our history and our culture and sharing it with the rest of the world. Similar to what other countries are doing. For instance, like in Tallinn, Estonia, where they have a medieval walled city. I wish our Intramuros would be not just like that, but maybe even better, so it would be really a living walled city of the past, the present, and the future.
Very unique, one of its kind. It's a historical zone, actually. You have lots of museums in and out of the walls. Jaime Jimmy Lim. I've started doing business here in 1988. I opened a small retail shop catering to Mapa students just in front of OWA, Overseas Worker Welfare Administration. And my main customer is Mapa. So now we thought of putting up this training center institute right in the heart of Intramuros. What better place, because it is a university hub. As you can see, we have 5 universities here and 1 middle school. We need more of this current administrator to see a better Intramuros. I'm very happy right now with the current administrator. Then what I hope for is a cleaner Intramuros. I hope all the stakeholders inside Intramuros will come together. We cannot all be leaders. Let's just follow the leader who is giving us the right direction.
Early during the Marcos administration, Mrs. Marcos had been interested in the restoration of Intramuros. She led the restoration of some of the gates of Intramuros. Mrs. Marcos got the engineering divisions of the different services of the military. There were lots of objections. I called the attention of President Marcos. So he asked me to draft a charter for Intramuros, which is what I did, and that is the Intramuros Administration Charter. greatest satisfaction I had was the presence of a good team headed by Mrs. Esperanza Garpontol, and in the early days also Felix Imperial, because basically the three of us were the ones who set the initial directions of the Intramuros Administration. It's important because it's part of our history, part of our heritage, one of the few physical evidences remaining of the Spanish period of Philippine history. I think the major development since that time was the proliferation of informal settlers. And it seems to me that the proper and humanitarian relocation of those informal settlers is critical to the future progress of Intramuros. I'm Jaime Laya, and I think the directions of the development of Intramuros embodied in the administration charter continue to be relevant.
Intramuros for me is a place that tells you the story of Manila, the city that I was born in, the city that I worked in, and the city that I live in and will probably live in for the next years. My life with Intramuros began in 1999 when I started volunteering for a museum, Bahay Chinoy. And it was from there that I started doing cultural work, and eventually which led to us establishing our tour outfit in 2005. Intramuros is a place of a lot of personal memories for me because I've been coming here since I was a little boy. I remember my first trip here was in the 1980s when we had a school trip at San Agustin Museum. And I distinctly remember getting freaked out because I went to a crypt with lots of dead people, and which nobody really explained what they were. So that fascination with Manila's history, with my personal family's history, began here in Intramuros. I think what we do here in Intramuros introduces people to our city. And by introducing Intramuros to our visitors, we tell them the story and we make them understand the city, my city, Manila, what it was, how it is today, and what it will be in the future. My hopes for Intramuros is to be a place that is anchored in its past, but at the same time, it's a place that can have new ideas for the future. No? A place that will inspire people, a place that will create good memories, and a place that will make you feel good about being a Manileño. I'm Ivan Mandy. I'm a cultural guide from Old Manila Walks, and we have been doing historical walks around the old city since 2005.
na po now. It's 3
Okay.
o'clock.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our Zoom participants, as well as those on Facebook Live.
Recording in progress.
This is now the episode 57 of our Intramuros Learning Sessions. And this afternoon, we're very honored to have with us the Executive Director of the National Archives of the Philippines. For introduction, let me share my screen first. Right. So the topic, our topic this afternoon is Boljoon, Records to Retablo. And our resource speaker is Executive Director Victorino, Mapa, Manalo. Okay. So of the National Archives of the Philippines. And of course, it's June 12th, so happy Independence Day to everyone. Okay, so few house rules before we start. For Zoom attendees, you may raise your questions via the Q&A button. And for those viewing on Facebook Live, you may raise your questions in the comment section. And those who have successfully registered and viewed on Zoom will be eligible to get an e-certificate. And a feedback form will be emailed to you after the session. The certificate will be sent within 1 week. And please note that the seminar is recorded and the recording shall be made permanently available in IA's social media channels. To introduce our speaker, Victorino Mapa Manalo is the Executive Director of the National Archives of the Philippines. He is also a board member at the National Commission for Culture and the Arts and the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Previously, Director Manalo was a museum director at the Metropolitan Museum of Manila, as well as at the Cultural Center of the Philippines. He previously worked with the Ayala Foundation, where he developed, designed, and established exhibits, tours, and programs for the Community Museum of the parish of his hometown, Dawis, Bohol. He is also a writer who has won national prizes, like the Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Award for Literature. Director Manalo holds a master's in international affairs from Columbia University and a postgraduate certificate for archival studies from Hong Kong University. In December of 2013, he was a top-notcher for the Career Executive Service eligibility examination administered by the Career Executive Service Board. So without further ado, let me introduce Director Manalo to you. Director Manalo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just, okay, 1 second. Wait a minute. Let me just, okay, one. Okay. Thanks. Before I start, I want to greet all of you. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming today. I also want to say thank you to Attorney Giler Asido, Jeffrey Yap, and Rancho Arcilia of the Intramuros Administration for having me here today. Thank you too to the National Archives of the Philippines for assistance with coordination and the like. I'd like to thank especially Clarice Garcia for all her help. This lecture is taken from an essay published in the Philippine Quarterly of Culture and Society of the University of San Carlos, edited by Dr. Jose Eleazar Bersales. Much material was left out in preparing the essay for lecture purposes. Nevertheless, the lecture will run about 1.5 hours to maybe even 2 hours, and then we will accept questions after that. If you don't understand a slide, it's possible that it's because the related slides were removed, and so don't be afraid to ask me about them. No? To begin then, a reading of Boljoon Not yet, not yet. Yeah. A reading of Boljoon from Records to Retablos by Ino Manalo. This lecture is dedicated to Santiago Albano Pilar and one second, and to the people of Boljoon. I'm sorry, I'm just trying. One second. I'm just trying to adjust that. I can see the. Oh dear. Okay. There, perfect. Okay. Sorry about that. So this lecture is dedicated to Santiago Albano Pilar and the people of Boljoon. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Here is my lecture outline. So just take a quick look. You will see that there are 6 parts. I will cue you every time I need a slide change. Next slide, please. Next slide. In the search for a community's memories, people turn to records. In the Philippines, it is often the Catholic Church which is the main source of local documents from before the 20th century. That the Church has even managed to preserve anything at all is remarkable when one considers the threats posed by disaster. Next slide. Writing on India's Goa, which, like the Philippines, was an Asian territory with Iberian Catholic colonizers, Teotonio R. de Souza opined that church records are important but often overlooked reference materials. He explains that these records can yield valuable insights into the neglected issues of Goan society. Next slide. Ancient ledgers can produce information that may be of value for fields beyond the socio-economic. Examining the 1807 parish inventory of Paete, Laguna Province, eminent church art historian Regalado Trota Jose found a letter in which the priest reported that a large painting of Saint Christopher was purchased for 22 pesos in October of 1852. This confers on the work the distinction of being among the few such church pieces from the Spanish period with a definite date and cause. Next slide. In the case of this is now the first part, no? Reading church records. In the case of the parish of Patrocinio de Maria in the town of Boljoon in southern Cebu, a parish administered by the friars of the Order of St. Augustine during the Spanish period, the church office keeps several bound volumes of documents predating the Second World War, when so much of the Philippines' cultural resources were savagely destroyed. Just like its counterparts in Goa, what Boljoon has preserved are mostly listings on baptisms, weddings, and deaths. An initial appraisal of these records can provide some insights into parish life from the Spanish era to the present day. Next slide. It is reported that documents were kept in the sacristy, in a 2-door Nara cabinet which has since been moved to the parish museum. The cabinet's upper frame has the words written in black, Archivo Parroquia de Boljoon, Año de 1884, with the town's name spelled differently from the official version used at present, Boljoon. Indeed, inside are many well-worn volumes bound in leather, which a museum caption indicates were made from carabao skin and pig skin. We also know that across the water in Hagna, the leather of the kagang, or kind of flying lemur, was also sold for leather for books. No, since records are evidence of transactions, it turns out that in the strictest sense, only 27 of these bound books contain records. The other items in the cabinet include a script and 4 publications. Of the 27, 12 are dedicated to baptisms. There are 3 more that are on display in the museum's glass cases, and the parish office keeps more baptismal registries, bringing the total of books for baptisms to 67. Aside from the archival baptism ledgers, there are 15 marriage books, a single book on confirmations, and 12 archival death registers. Next slide. Among the 3 baptism books kept in the museum's cases is a ledger for the years 1793 to 1803. It bears the title Libro de Bautismos de este Pueblo de Boljoon y sus Visitas. Appliqued to the cover is a leather piece on which an image has been drawn in ink of a bicephalous bird, possibly an eagle, with each head wearing a crown. Perhaps to continue the avian theme, the L in Libros has been transformed into a winged creature with a prominent beak. Next slide. So, makita natin, no, pinaglalaruan yung mga baptism registers long ago. No? These are old drawings, old doodles. Another volume of baptisms, 1834 to 1843, also has an applique leather device. This time, it is a rendering in ink of 3 pomegranates, which is a kind of fruit. No? We call them granada in the Philippines. Next slide. The 793 to 1803 registry begins with an entry on the baptism of Juan Lorenzo on October 12, 1793. This is the earliest record of any kind in the Boljoon collection. The fact that nothing older exists is a poignant reminder that the town was supposedly burned down in 1782 by Moro soldiers. Next slide. This is a kind of sort of tableau that I put together, no, with using a photograph of a reenactment in the Visayan town of Gimbal, no, and I overlay it over the image of the painting by Lorenzo Guerrero entitled El Fuego, which is in the Pascual collection. There is no eyewitness record of the attack, only some accounts written decades later. It is generally presumed that the town's documents were lost to the flames along with the church. Next slide. Aside from the record books already mentioned, there are several more interesting items on display in the museum's cases. One book opens with a note signed by Father Fabian Rodriguez, who has affixed his stamp, you can see it in the bottom, on an oval, and who has affixed his stamp, which is an oval with a flower in the middle. On another record book is another stamp. This time, it's the one on the right, this time an oval with a monogram for the Virgin in the style of the 19th century, which is topped with stars and is encircled by the name of the parish, Parroquia del Patrocinio de Boljoon. Next slide. 3 census books make up still another set of records. These cover the years 1872, 1885, and 1894, so pretty much every 10 years. No? It will be seen that the official name of the census changes over the years from Plan General to Estado de Almas to Padron, with some minor variations. There are as well individual receipts and a book of accounts from 1897. Next slide. In the book of accounts are the salaries of the lavandera or laundry woman and the organista or organ player. The sacristan salaries were recorded along with those of the cantores or singers. One other salary listed is that of the escribiente de la iglesia. The phrase very likely refers to the scribe who oversaw the church registries, though the term maestro has also been reported for the same occupation. And you can see from the term maestro that the escribiente was held in high regard. Along with the escribiente's salary, there is an item that provides a perspective about the records-keeping environment at that time. And this is Libro Canónico de Bautismos de 302 hojas de papel catalán. Consisting of what is likely to be high-quality paper brought in from Catalonia in Spain, it is the most expensive object on its page. At 14 pesos, its cost surpassed the individual salaries of the laundress, the organ player, the sacristans, the singers, and even the scribe. Next slide. In terms of demographics, a significant point may immediately be noted. There are more birth records than any other kind. Does this signal that a great number of infants were perishing before they could grow up, marry, and die? There are different answers to this question. Whatever the answer, this puzzle illustrates the Goan writer's point that church records can provide a window into community life in the colonial era. Excuse me. Another intriguing feature of the records is the language used. The volumes on baptism from 1783 to 1955, for example, are in Spanish. The volumes for the next year seem some changes in format and are all in English. If Boljoon's case is typical, then, evidently, Spanish remained the language of record keeping in Philippine parishes even after the American invasion of the late 1890s and all the way to the 1950s. What then was the effect on the parishioners of having to navigate through bureaucratic documents in a language other than what they spoke every day? The parish also had another logbook of accounts, the Libro de Gobierno, with some transactions in Visayan. Writing styles varied from century to century, yet when compared with colonial period registers from other Hispanic countries, or Hispanicized countries, it is seen that, in terms of format and size, the Boljoon records are remarkably similar to their counterparts throughout the Spanish Empire. They're also very similar to the Spanish records in the collection of the National Archives of the Philippines. Next slide. Catherine Burns has commented on this observed unity in convention. She has also pointed out how the doodles on the cover pages of bound volumes of records, like the letter L transformed into a bird, presents the only breaks in conformity. Scribes were employed to produce and manage the many documents that the bureaucracy of state and church demanded, but it was probably still the parish priest who was ultimately responsible and who had to fill in every time there was a lack of scribes. Important life events like births, marriages, and deaths were meticulously noted down. The figures were then aggregated to come up with a census, which presumably was turned over to the diocese. Next slide. Second part, reading inventories. Finally, the Boljoon collection boasts of 3 sets of inventories. The oldest one has entries which begin in 1795. Updates were made in subsequent years, from 1798 to 1831. The second inventory begins in 1914. Reviews were done in 1916 to 1930. Reviews were done in 1916 to 1839 to 1939. Then in 1947, a third whole new inventory was undertaken. Some previous entries were crossed out. What was the meaning of the erased items? Updates to this third inventory were made in 1948 and then in 1951 all the way to 1973. If an inventory was undertaken at present, then the parish could boast of a count that covers 4 centuries. This is quite remarkable given the calamities that had visited the town. Next slide. Considering the context of what was transpiring while the listings were being made makes more evident the significance of these inventories. The earliest extant count was accomplished at the close of the 18th century, barely a decade after the 1782 attack that supposedly razed the town. It is, therefore, first a picture of the status of Boljoon in the 1700s. It also gives an idea of what may have survived of the church possessions and how the parish had coped with the tragic attack. The succeeding updates take the inventory into the 19th century, the final epoch of Spanish rule in the Philippines. Meanwhile, the new listing of 1914 can be seen to capture the situation of the Southern Cebu Church after it had gone through the period of the Philippine Revolution and the American invasion. The year 1914 also stands for the second decade of the rule of the United States. What bears emphasizing is that the parish appears to have weathered well the years of tumultuous transition. One will see that a lot of items listed in the 18th and 19th century still appear in 1914 after the change of colonial regimes. Next slide, please. The 1947 inventory can be said to represent the first years of a new Philippine Republic. More poignantly, it provides a glimpse of Boljoon after the Holocaust of the Second World War. The later updates coincide with the social changes and upheavals of the 1950s and the 1960s, before ending in 1973, a year after the September 1972 declaration that placed the whole country under martial law. In 1973, the different lots owned by the church were carefully listed. 7 pages were filled with descriptions of the various parcels in the town proper and in the barrios. This may have been triggered by a sense of uncertainty that prevailed after the imposition of martial law in 1972. After 3 centuries of entries carefully written in black ink, the final update ended with a validating signature rendered with a bright red felt tip pen on the 17th of July, 1973. Next slide. Reviewing the different inventories, it may initially be concluded that merely more than 10 years after the calamitous attack of 1782, the parish already seems to have in its possession the full range of objects necessary for its central functions. One sees ritual items such as the salt vessels and silver shell for the sacrament of baptism, as well as the viaticum container for the last rites. Likewise, there is a complete complement of procession paraphernalia and images that are used for annual celebrations. Clearly, These items were instruments for carrying out the parish's most essential services, the administering of sacraments, and the observance of annual feasts. Next slide. We're now in the third section, reading church objects. Having perused so many lists of articles, it therefore makes sense to turn the examination to the articles themselves, especially those found in the Boljoon Parish Museum. Surveying the collection, one sees many objects that are cited in the inventories. Viewing the array of items, the question arises, how do the inventory entries relate to what they are describing? It is evident that the lists only carry basic information. The actual objects have much more to convey, especially when unpacked by the methods of art history. Next slide. An illustrative example is the Boljoon Portapas, which is a palm-sized ritual, palm of the hand, no? Which is a palm-sized ritual object that was brought around for the congregation to kiss. It was first mentioned in the 1795 list of silver items and then carried over to the 1914 and 1947 inventories. Since there was never an entry about another portapas, it can be assumed that what is displayed in the museum is the 1795 piece. At the center of the Boljoon portapas is a crux hemina, or double-barred cross, standing on a base with many steps. On the pediment may be seen curving teardrop-shaped forms that enclose a combined polka dot and checkerboard pattern, which resembles the stylized skin of a pineapple. Next slide. Standing, we're talking now about the pediment, no? Standing on the two, or the crown of the portapas, standing on the two column capitals is a pair of angels with oval heads, bulging eyeballs, and wings. The features of the angels are rendered in a manner which Regalado Jose has described as a santol face, an iconographic detail unique to Spanish colonial pieces in the Philippines. All what I have described, are in keeping with what was in vogue during the 18th century, thereby suggesting that the piece dates from that time, from the time, which is 1795, as was initially assumed. Next slide. The pineapple teardrop forms also appear in many other objects throughout the country. They can be seen in an exquisite silver sacra, which has the distinction of being dateable from another Bohol church, which is Maribohok. You can see the pineapple design at the extreme right, no? You will see something that looks like a paisley, and inside it is the pineapple pattern. There is a print inside the frame, and it carries a date, 1700, which is quite incredible, no? The Boljoon piece may be compared to two other. Next slide, please. Next slide. The Boljoon piece may be compared to two other portapas from Bohol. One from the town of Baclayon, which is this is the one on the left, on the left, yes, and the other from Lobok, which is on the right. One may venture that the similarities, but also the differences between the three portapas are indicative of a production process that allowed the selection and combination of standard elements according to varying preferences. It almost looks like they could look at the priest could consult a catalog and they could choose which feature they wanted on their portapas, no? Because you can see that one has the same crown but different cross, and another has the same cross but different frame. Next slide. No, 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 not next slide. Also interesting is the local term for portapas, which is pasticum. This is probably based on the Latin phrase pax tecum, or peace be with you, which I'm not quite sure about the translation, but I have seen it translated as peace be with you, but I think you can also say it in another way. This is probably the formula that was enunciated each time a parishioner bent down to kiss the sacred object. Kaya na-connect na yung term, yung phrase sa object, no? Even though the Spanish term is portapas. The term is used in Bohol as well. Next to be considered are three statues that are reported to come from the main retablo: San Agustin, San Nicolas de Tolentino, and Santo Tomas de Villanueva. The images of these three saints are already described in the 1795 inventory as dorado or gilded. Next slide. One of the no, back please, back. Of the three, the Santo Tomas statue stands out because of its wide eyelids, the curls of its hair, and the molding of its face. These features are akin to those of figures thought to be produced by workshops of artisans familiar with Chinese traditions. A quick glance will show that the ornamentation of the statue's attire indeed displays an affinity with fabrics from China. One scholar, the late Santiago Pilar, has also identified the complex decorative painting of the Santo Tomas carved garments to be in the manner of the 18th century. Next slide. Here's a detail of the the robe. No, it will be discerned that the flowers festooning the saint's red outer robe are actually lotuses, a most auspicious symbol in the iconography of the Middle Kingdom. An even closer perusal will reveal that the blossom on the shoulder of Santo Tomas has in fact 8 petals. This further strengthens the links with Chinese artisans, as the 8-petaled lotus has long been revered in China. It may be noted that the lotus design is similar to that of the Boljoon portapas described earlier. Next slide. The supposed sinicized facial elements of the Santo Tomas may be observed in another piece in Boljoon, the large deteriorated painting of the Virgin holding a scepter while the Christ child sits on her lap. I think this is a painting of the Patrocinio. It can be noted that Mary's face in the Boljoon painting has some similarities with the 1500s Nuestra Señora de Pronto Socorro, this is the one on the right, which is thought to have been made by a Chinese artist, also identified by Santiago Pilar. Next slide. One may likewise discern in the half-closed eyelids the oval face, and the pursed lips of both the Virgin and the Child of the Patrocinio, or the deteriorated painting, a possible affinity with the so-called Kuan Yin Nuestra Señora del Rosario, which is said to be the product of Chinese painters active on the island of Bohol in the 19th century. Since Bohol is so near, these painters could have been accepting commissions in Cebu as well. Of course, they can also be homegrown painters in Cebu. One will also find similarly rendered facial features in a most uncanny place, on the door of a large cabinet that used to be kept in the Museum of Lobok. This is the image on the right. When a layer of the door's white paint was scraped off, this sublime face was revealed. Next slide. There are as well many standing altar ornaments or ramilletes which, true to their name, emulate flowering branches, as rama is a Spanish word for branch. The inventories record sets of these in wood and in metal for the different altars. There are also examples made of lagang, which are polished pieces from the chambered nautilus. Next slide. There is one object whose presence in the inventories makes its absence in the museum even more palpable. The Niño Dormido of ivory and its silver bed. What is seen today in the museum inside the scene today in the museum is really is actually a replica. No, it's made of wood, and the bed is made of I think stainless steel. The sleeping Christ child appeared in the record books as early as the 1795 inventory. The 1914 listing reported that the Holy Infant had a silver bed and an urna or case. The urna resurfaces in the 1947 count, where it is breathlessly described as gilded and well carved, or, and this is quite unusual that there would be such a description, in the original Spanish, dorado y buen labrada. There is an impressive urna that remains in the museum today, which is presumably what is described in the records. It is crowned by oval and teardrop shapes that may have once contained glass pieces with reverse painting. What is most startling is that the mound on which the original bed with its slumbering child would have stood before the child and bed were disappeared would have where this slumbering child would have and his bed would have stood. This mound is actually covered with thousands of insect wings. This is what you see on the right. No, those are insect wings. Next slide. Long ago, in the age of the galleons, many workshops in Manila and in Canton were producing exquisite pieces for markets in the Americas and Europe. Among the creations were tabletop tableaux of episodes of Christ's life, such as his nativity and crucifixion. These miniature landscapes would have been embellished with shimmering materials like mother of pearl and bird feathers. This is just an example. This piece comes from the Leon Gallery auction of a few years ago. Clearly, the Boljoon urna, as well as its lost infant, arose from this context. Parishioners still speak of the missing baby in hushed tones, remembering how his appearance on the Retablo Mayor would signal the start of the Christmas season. Next slide. An early 20th century photograph of the Santo Niño Church in Cebu depicts an altar dressed up for Christmas. It provides an idea of the kind of setting in which the ivory infant would have been placed. One sees in the vintage photo two violinists playing before statues of Saint Joseph and the Virgin in the attire of the Divina Pastora, as signaled by her hat. The tableau has been installed right on the altar, while the rest of the retablo is hidden by a huge canvas painted with a landscape supposedly of the Holy Land. Setting up this Christmas display was evidently a major undertaking involving carpenters, painters, musicians, and more, with the whole town as audience. Next slide. The narrative of what has been lost continues with a wooden plaque carved in relief with the image of a sainted pope or a doctor of the church. It used to be on the church's pulpit along with other similarly attired figures, as seen in an old photograph. Some years back, however, the plaques of the Pope's brethren disappeared. Next slide. Other objects are present in the gallery but absent from the records. A good example of this is what townspeople call teneblas or tenieblas, or once I even heard the term teneblasan. There are local terms these are local terms for a triangular rack, which in Spanish would have been known as a tenebrario. It was used in the Holy Week ritual of the tinieblas or tenebre. One may ask why this triangular rack was not recorded in the counts, either under its Visayan name or its Spanish one. It is also interesting to contemplate how something that was apparently not worth listing was accorded by the community its own local monikers as well, and was still preserved decades after it was last used. Then again, it could well be that it was made after the inventories, after the last of the inventories. Like next slide. Likewise, not on the books are gold painted frames that can be described as mandorla or almond shaped. The frames are actually made of a material called saksak, which is the inner piece of the rib of the nipa palm. They are evidently the work of members of the community. One then has to wonder, were the nipa mandorlas not listed because they were the product of local hands and made from materials easily gathered from the nearby swamps? Or again, is it also because they were made after the last of the inventories? The examples discussed here make it clear that objects have linkages that range further than can ever be recorded in an inventory. Information can be likewise gleaned as much as from what is listed as from what is not listed. Next slide. This is the fourth part, reading retablos. The many lacunae in archival sources from the years of the Spanish colonial period leave room for speculation. Due to the dearth of historical accounting, writers have had to make educated guesses regarding the dating of Boljoon's magnificent main retablo or altar mayor. As the focal points of devotion in a church, retablos deserve to be the objects of serious study. It may be seen that much of what has been written on such altar pieces is actually framed by certain preconceptions. The first of these is the idea that the construction of Spanish colonial churches and retablos in the Philippines involves a process which privileges priests as builders and designers. What needs to be examined further is how a local workforce, which had no previous experience in erecting large stone structures that were roofed, came to build the huge edifices that the Spanish required. What was this process like? No, that's something to think about. Next slide. One remedy to the lack of structural expertise was the hiring of artisans from China. Jean-Paul Potey provides documentation of how craftsmen of Chinese extraction were commissioned by the parish priest to create the retablos of the Laguna Church in 1646. Meanwhile, the involvement of Chinese carpenters may be suggested by the pillars and corbels of the Cebu Jesuit House of 1730. You see it on the left underneath the escudo with the year 1730, and also the pillars and corbels of Daoist, the Daoist Convento, which is older than the rest of the church. Which these are the ones on the upper right. There's the presence of or the work of Chinese carpenters are suggested by these pillars and corbels because they resemble building elements in China. So you see the one on the bottom right. This is from a Chinese building. I mean, this is from a building in China, in Beijing. However, conclusions should be weighed well, as similar building elements are also found in Spain. This is the one in the very center. Now, this is from Toledo. Next slide. Toledo in Spain and not Toledo in Cebu. As was the case in Latin America, prints and book frontispieces could also have been the sources for Spanish period art and architecture in the Philippines. For instance, it can be seen that the 1701 print of the De Guia on the left, on the right, I mean, bears a remarkable resemblance to the topmost level of the side retablo of Lubbock, which is from the Jesuit period. This is the piece on the left. No? Look at how similar they are. Another perspective is in the study of Phil-Hispanic church arts is the notion that it is possible to apply European stylistic conventions wholesale in the Philippine context. This is problematic because it does not take into consideration the disparities in socio-cultural environments. Consequently, one publication will pronounce a Philippine church as having Romanesque features, while another will describe it as Baroque. One even hears of a church classified under the rather ridiculous rubric of pseudo-Renaissance. Given what was just described, it may be better to concentrate on specific elements instead of trying to ascertain an omnibus style for the entire church. Focusing on motifs allows for a more transparent and verifiable comparative survey. Lastly, the most common approach for determining the age of retablos is to assume that the date for the completion of the church is also the date for the construction of altar pieces. Yet, it should be pointed out that older retablos can be renewed for a newer building. No? So in other words, it came from the older building which was torn down and transferred to the newer building. So it would not be correct to date it from the date of the construction of the new building, of the new church. Next slide. Returning to the retablo which we are now studying, the deadly 782 attack on Boljoon has led to the commonly held assumption that the altarpiece of Boljoon was one of the many casualties of the disaster. Consequently, it is thought that the present Boljoon retablo was created only after 1782. One published source even posits an 1800s dating, so 19th century. Once again, the parish records can be examined for clues. The 1795 inventory does have an entry regarding a retablo nuevo sin pintar, or a new unpainted retablo. Since no other new retablo is mentioned in the updates between 1795 and 1914, it can therefore be suggested initially that the Boljoon altar mayor, was the retablo nuevo reported in the earliest surviving inventory, and therefore dating it to around 1795. This proposal of a 1795 date of the altar mayor's creation will need to be weighed vis-a-vis insights generated from comparing the decorative elements of the Boljoon main retablo with the elements of altar screens, mostly in nearby churches. I use these terms interchangeably, all throughout my essay. I use altarpiece, retablo, altar screen, or just screens, Next slide. The Boljoon altar mayor is carved with many motifs which are typical of Philippine churches of the 18th century. On its sotobanco, or lower base, are relief images of grooved vases with sprigs of flowers, traditionally associated with the purity of the Virgin Mary. The vases are seen as well on the sotobanco, or the lowest level, of the Basilica of the Santo Niños Grand Retablo in Cebu, which may have been constructed around 1740 or even earlier. Next slide, please. The grooved vase motif also appears on the magnificent silver atril of Lobok in Bohol. This piece not only bears the name of the town, as you can see on top, no, it's engraved, but the date, June 17, so a few days na lang, birthday niya na, June 17, 1776. Gemini pala itong atril na to, no? The atril or Bible stand can then be used as a basis for determining the time of creation of other related items. A vase with flowers appears in documents too, as in the borders of a Cebu-related 1736 manuscript in the Augustinian archives in Valladolid. Unfortunately, I think I've taken out this slide. All these similar images then are the first indication that the decorative program of the Boljoon retablo may date to an earlier period, earlier than 1782. No? Next slide. The vase with flowers is part of the standard iconography of the images of the Annunciation. One can consider the circa 18th century Annunciation panel from the Bantu collection, which came from the old retablo of the Recoletos Church in Cebu, now destroyed. You will see the vase, no, falling down, because in a way it has become become the symbol of the Blessed Virgin, and a symbol of how she must feel, the jolt she must have felt because of the angel's announcement. Next slide. One distinctive floral decoration found all over the main Boljoon altar screen and the side screens is the closed lotus bud. This design may be dated by a comparison with similar images in Argao and with the sacristy door, you can see on the extreme right, the sacristy door of Baclayon in Bohol, which predates the Jesuit expulsion of 1768. It is noteworthy that the closed lotus bud motif does not seem common in churches outside of the Visayas. There may be, but no examples come to mind. No? So on the extreme right, you will see the door, the sacristy door of Baclayon, with lotus blooms in different stages, some closed, some semi-closed, and some open. Then on the lower middle image is that of a door in Argao, and the top is a close-up of the closed lotus design motif in the sacristy door of Baclayon, and on the left is an old urna in one of the houses in Bohol with a closed lotus leaf. You can see that in a way there was some urnas were really copying designs of the church. Next slide. A third floral motif would be a blossoming vine that calls to mind a type of orchid that grows wild in Philippine forests, the sanggumay. What is quite remarkable about the way the vines are depicted in Boljoon is that the upper end sports a blossom with a stem that is shaped like a hook, which then hangs from a kind of loop. You can see it illustrated in the picture on the left. The hanging floral device, albeit with no hook, is also seen in two panels that were collected from the Argao Church compound and are now in the University of San Carlos Museum. While there is no recorded date, it is plausible that these carvings were discarded when Argao Church was refurbished in the 1780s and therefore may date to this time. Next slide. The sotobanco of the Boljoon altar screen is embellished with 4 angels or Atlantes with arms stretched upward as if supporting the upper cuerpos. The cuerpos are levels, no? The Boljoon Atlantes can be compared to those found on the sotobanco of the Retablo Mayor of Cebu City Santo Niño Basilica. A noteworthy difference is that the thumbs of the Boljoon Atlantes are curling around the edge of the wooden cornice they are holding up, while the hands of their basilica counterparts are mostly hidden from view. All these discussions on iconography shared with retablos and objects that mostly date from the 1710s to the 1780s situate the Boljoon altarpiece in this in the first case, or immediately situate the altarpiece in the context of the 18th century. So we begin with that. No, it is firmly in the context of the 18th century, but possibly a little earlier than 1795. This, when the emphasis of the discussion shifts to silhouettes, however, the time frame begins to narrow, involving a more specific period. So now the time frame becomes more defined when we start talking about silhouettes. Next slide. One characteristic that distinguishes the retablo under scrutiny, or the Boljoon retablo, is its perfect equilateral triangle configuration. It has 3 cuerpos or levels, with the first cuerpo having 5 nichos or alcoves, and then the second 3, and the last 1. No? So 5, 3, 1. This aids in creating the triangular outline. And also, you can see that the central alcoves are aligned. No? They're centered. In contrast, the Basilica, the Santo Niño Basilica in Cebu City, the Basilica's retablo has a different configuration. The Basilica is the big retablo on the left, no? And the Boljoon is the one on the right. In contrast, the Basilica retablo, though also somewhat triangular, has a different configuration, with 7 nichos in the first cuerpo, topped by another 7 nichos on the second cuerpo, ending with 3 alcoves that make up the last cuerpo or level, known as the attico. Next slide. It well may be that in all the land, the only retablos that exactly match Boljoon's equilateral triangular form, as well as number and arrangement of alcoves, are both found in the Romblon Islands group. The first retablo is in the parish church of the island municipality of Banton. This is the one in the illustration. While the second retablo is in the Cathedral of St. Joseph in the provincial capital, also called Romblon. I will show it to you later. Both shrines were administered by the Augustinian Recollects. Regalado Jose again opines that the Banton altarpiece may date to the late 18th century, though other dates are also possible. Next slide. Aside from its triangle, this is now the Romblon Cathedral altarpiece. Aside from its triangular silhouette, the retablo of Romblon Cathedral has many other parallels with its sibling in Boljoon. The Romblon altarpiece sports paisley-shaped finials at the end of its upper entablatures. Though Boljoon's pediment is unbroken, its lower cuerpos have its topmost pediment, no? Its lower cuerpos have pairs of protuberances, albeit differently formed, in the exact same locations as that in the Romblon screen. One can easily conclude that the 2 retablos being compared are actually variations from the same mold. Perhaps the curates of the 2 towns, being from related priestly orders, no? One is Augustinian Recollect, the other one is Augustinian, had worked with the same carpenters and designers. The Romblon Cathedral retablo has a signal distinction of having a date inscribed on it. You can barely see it in this picture. On the lower part or the bases of the pilaster of the second cuerpo is carved in each one, no? A different numeral in each one. It's carved in Roman numerals, the year 1726, which can now help date the Boljoon altarpiece. Taking these points of convergence, it is possible to more convincingly suggest that the Boljoon altarpiece was actually built at an earlier time than was previously thought. Is it possible that the Boljoon altar mayor was fashioned between the 1720s and the 1760s? An implication of this dating is that the Boljoon altar mayor could not have been the retablo listed as new in 1795. Next slide. Interestingly, one approach to addressing this last point involves looking at two backdrops which the Boljoon screen does not resemble. So that we're now coming up with the contrasting ones. No? These are the altarpieces of the neighboring towns of Argao and Dalaget in Cebu, which are estimated to have been made sometime in the 1780s and the 1800s, respectively. The Argao and Dalaget retablos are alike in shape, layout, and decoration. I mean, I like. They're like each other. No? They have triangular outlines, but only have two cuerpos each, with three large nichos in the first level and one on the second. So those slightly triangular, they have a completely different layout from the Romblon and Boljoon altarpieces. No? Next slide. What is perhaps the most significant iconographic difference is that the Argao and Dalaget main altarpieces are covered with a distinct decorative element that is absent from Boljoon's altar mayor. And this is the Rocaille medallion or arabesque. This is the weird, strangely shaped medallion on the left. This medallion comes in myriad irregular forms, which generally copy seashells or pockmarked rocks, and which exhibit a high degree of asymmetry. It is most extensively showcased in the Philippines in the wonderful retablos of the Church of Tanay in Rizal, which were supposed to have been completed in 1783. Again, I took out the slide of Tanay Church. No? This is where that medallion on the left, that Rocaille medallion on the left comes from, no? From Tanay. The Rocaille is part of a European design repertoire which, according to scholar Martin Tino, entered the Philippines in the 1750s. Jesuit art historian Rene Javellana, on the other hand, posits a later period for the entry, the 1780s. So Regalado Trota Jose resolves this disparate entry dates by suggesting instead the second half of the 18th century. So sinabi, para wag na magkaiba-iba, second half of the 18th century. Jose and Tino further point out that the Rocaille persisted up to the early 19th century, as can be seen, for example, in an escudo in an Iloilo map of 1821, beautiful map, from the collection of the National Archives of the Philippines. So you see, no, on the right, that is still a form of a Rocaille medallion, some less asymmetrical, but still partially asymmetrical, especially with regard to the top and the bottom. No? And this is from the National Archives. Next slide. In both the Argao and the Dalaget main retablos, Rocaille medallions may be seen in such places as the flanges and the the ornate borders of the nichos. No? Next slide. What may be, however, the most fascinating avatars of the Rocaille are on the sotobancos of the two altar screens. Here one finds exquisitely painted and carved asymmetrical shell-like arabesques which are hanging from swags of cloth. No, look at the one at the left. No, so this is quite unusual, and even the Tanay altarpiece, no, a Swiss or German, I can't remember if he's Swiss or German. A Swiss or German art historian has pointed out that it looks like a local or Philippine innovation because an architectural element was part of the medallion. It was incorporated into the medallion. So this idea of a hanging semi heart-shaped medallion is also quite unusual. And these are found in both the Laget and also in Argao, but not in Boljoon. What the Boljoon retablo has, in fact, it has its own kind of medallion, and you can see it on the right. No, its basic unit of design is a solid oval that only appears irregular because its outline is violated by the four elements that loop around its rim. The whole ensemble, which is topped by a crown, appears more stable and solid than the Rocaille medallion. So it's not as extravagant or as asymmetrical as the Rocaille medallion. In fact, you can still perceive the oval. And so the point then is, the absence of the Rocaille arabesque in the Boljoon altar mayor and its presence in Argao and Dalaget is a signal that possibly the Boljoon retablo may come from a period before the introduction of such motifs to the Philippines and is therefore older than the other two in Dalaget and Argao. This then lends support to the tentative dates 1720s to 1760s that have been put forward here. One can of course insist that the Boljoon altar mayor was built after the 1782 conflagration, but this would mean that the reconstructed Boljoon altar screen was made around the same time as its Argao and Dalaget. Diba? Kung it was made after 1782, kasabay niya yung Argao and Dalaget counterparts. No? The problematic question then inevitably arises. Would the builders and perhaps even the townspeople of Boljoon have agreed to erect an altarpiece which was not in the latest mode, unlike those produced for their next-door neighbors? Papayag ba ang mga tao ng Boljoon na yung uso ngayon, ang uso na noon ay mga Rocaille medallions tapos ang kanilang retablo wala? Was there competitiveness in retablo making in Spanish period Cebu? Next slide. For that matter, positing that the Boljoon altar screen predates 1782 raises issues of its own. There is the matter of the Great Fire, supposedly of diba yung sabi ko kanina, during the 1782 attack of Boljoon, there was many things were burned, or the town burned down. No. Here, it can be asserted that retablos may survive a conflagration that demolishes the rest of the church and then are assembled as well as repainted. There, we can point to the case of Tagbilaran Cathedral in Boljoon. Even though it was ravaged by fire in the 19th century, it retained its 18th century Jesuit retablos. So you can see on the left, no, the Tagbilaran side retablo, which is in an older style than the neoclassic 19th century central retablo. No? On the right is a picture of a pulpit that survived the recent burning of a Peru church, or maybe it's not even Peru. I think it might even be Bolivia. No, but anyway, the point is parts of the church. As you can see, the roof has pretty much collapsed, but the pulpit is still there. And though it's burned on the outside, it can be cleaned and it can be refurbished again. No, it can be refurbished. So the same thing can happen to the retablos. No, they can be taken apart, as was shown in the case in the recent earthquake of 2013 in Bohol. But they can fall apart, but they can be put together again because they're made of interconnecting parts. No. Next slide. The Boljoon screen's other decorative features, no matter how minute, may help to narrow the time span under consideration. The tiny detail of a curling thumb in the Boljoon Atlantis, for example, may indicate that the Boljoon figures were made later, later than the 1730 Santo Niño Atlantis with the hidden hands. One can regard the ability to accurately depict the repositioned finger as a later development that presents an evolution in representation. It may be further argued that the implied flexibility of the Boljoon floral hook arrangement, the jagged finial contours, and even the curl of a thumb all intensify the sense of movement which characterize Philippine retablos dated to the 18th century. So we have a date now because of the configuration all the way up to 1726, but because of the absence of the rocaille, maybe it's we think it will be up to the 1760s. But now we know that it's not as old as Cebu, the Cebu retablo. The Cebu retablo could be older, so that narrows the period. No. The proposals presented here are by no means conclusive. In the absence of other records, all kinds of possibilities can be imagined. Next slide. So, just to recap, we now have dates that are something like 1730 to 1760 for the retablo, which is now earlier than what was thought before, which was at the end of the 18th century. Shifting the attention to the side altars or collaterales of Boljoon Church, it will be seen that the outline of these two backdrops, the two side retablos, is actually based on the attico or the topmost level of the main retablo. So faithful is the mirroring that the small crockets or little knobs, at the end of the main attico's pediment have also been reproduced in the side retablos. Next slide. Unlike the altar mayor, however, the side retablos or altarpieces have been painted using a vibrant palette that include teal, orange, green, and gold. These recall the hues on the beams of the 1730 Jesuit house of Cebu City. You can see the beams, in the lower left. They have a color scheme that was suggested by Rene Javellana to have a Mexican inspiration, perhaps like the colors on the hidden capital of San Agustin in Intramuros. This is you can see the hidden capital. It's hidden by the organ. No, it's behind the organ. That's why it was preserved. This is the hidden capital of the church of the Church of San Agustin in Intramuros. Look at the colors. No, imagine if that was still the colors today. So, to Rene Javellana, colors like these suggest a Mexican inspiration. Yet, one may also consider that the Boljoon minor altars boast of alcoves which have been decorated with patterns that approximate those of Chinese silks. As such, one could still posit that instead of a Mexican inspiration, the colors may have been modeled after Chinese preferences. After all, Javellana himself also proposed that the 1730 Jesuit house's beams had been worked on by Chinese artisans. Next slide. This Chinese connection is further strengthened because the 1798 inventory entry on the side retablos mentions frontales de China. I repeat, no, frontales de China. Remarkably, the composition of the frontals of the epistle side retablo somewhat resemble the layout of the so-called tokwi altar covers that were used in temples in China. Is it possible that the 1798 entry was referring to the fact, with this term frontales de China, to the fact that Chinese artisans had made the frontals in the manner of their homeland? These frontals could even have been imported, no? Tokwi cloths were exported. Next slide, sorry. So you can see the tokwi cloth on the left, no? And the frontal, or like a cover of the altar on the right. You can see that they're quite similar in configuration, no? Tokwi cloths were exported to Southeast Asia in large numbers in the early 1900s and were probably already in use in the 18th century, according to someone I interviewed. It must be clarified that the perceived resemblance to the temple cloths is far from definitive and can be purely coincidental. The connection with the tokwi is being suggested mainly to account for the frontales de China entry in the records. Next slide. The color scheme inspired by a Chinese palette and the alcoves that have been painted to echo the patterns of tela de canton may actually indicate a deliberate attempt to copy the designs of the Middle Kingdom. So on the left, no, you can see that this is the back of the alcove of the side retablo of Boljoon, and you can see that the patterns are like the wallpaper on the right, which is a Chinese style wallpaper, but not necessarily by Chinese people, no, and Chinese embroidery on the lower right, no. So what it might be really is a deliberate attempt to copy Chinese styles, but made by Chinese artisans, no. This is because the 17th and 18th century were known for chinoiserie, a craze in Europe for things from China or things that look like they came from China. Where the collaterales of Boljoon, the side altars or collaterales of Boljoon, manifestations of chinoiserie in southern Cebu at the close of the 18th century, were Chinese artists decorating retablos to conform with European notions of what was Chinese. So in other words, maybe they look this way or they're colored this way, but not because they reflect the taste of the Chinese or the style of the Chinese artists that may have worked on it, or the artisans who were trained in the Chinese manner, no? But because they were really trying to copy Chinese designs, because there was a rage or there was an uso, a fashion for what is now called chinoiserie, or attempts at copying Chinese style. No, wouldn't it be funny, no? That Chinese artists were actually creating chinoiserie in Boljoon retablos, no? What is likewise, next slide, what is likewise quite remarkable is that the supposed frontales de China of the epistle side retablo, of one of the side retablos, it's not on the other side, it's just on one side, is festooned with what are the only examples of the Rocaille medallion in Boljoon. So there are Rocaille medallions in Boljoon, but they're not on the main retablo. They are on the front panels, only on the front panels, and on the small tabernacle of the side retablos of Boljoon, no? These are found at the heart of the main sections and the upper bands of the two altar covers, no? Since the side retablos can be dated, to 1798 because of the inventory listing, they support a late 18th century advent for the motif in this part of Cebu. Where these were these rocaille medallions introduced into Boljoon Church so that Boljoon could kept up with the retablos of Argao and Dalaget, which were embellished in the prevailing style. In other words, because precisely the retablo did not have rocaille, because as I suggest, it was painted earlier before the design became famous. This was their attempt to keep up with Argao and Dalaget. So they also had rocaille medallions installed in the side panels, in the frontal panels of the side retablo. What's interesting is that chinoiserie was in fact associated sometimes, no, many times, often in Europe, chinoiserie was associated with the rocaille, no. So it really does also suggest that there may have been a link with there may have been attempts to really depict chinoiserie, no. Next slide. Coming at last to the baptistry, it will be seen that its backdrop is a small replica, or the retablo, no, is a small replica of the collaterales, but within the pediment as well as the flanges. I'm sorry, without the pediment as well as the flanges. So there is no pediment. Maybe it was taken away, and there are also no flanges or wings, no. For centuries, this altar screen held a painting by Severino Flavier Pablo of and depicting Saint Augustine's baptism, which was removed in the 1970s. This painting first makes its appearance in the inventory update of 1837. As such, it joins the Paete Saint Christopher as an example of a religious Spanish period artwork with a fairly accurate dating. You can see the painting on the left, no, and on the right is a new painting because the painting disappeared. The painting was removed in the 1970s. No. Next slide. And here we have a closer view of the painting, a colored photo of the painting. A photo of the 1837 Flavier Pablo canvas survives. It may be suggested that the painter probably portrayed the objects used in similar ceremonies of the period and in Boljoon itself. So used in baptisms and other ceremonies and even in Boljoon. No? As such, the painting allows a fleeting glimpse of what some articles in the inventories may have looked like. Saint Augustine is shown dressed in a simple white robe. He's the one in the middle, kneeling, no? And kneeling before a font, while the magnificently clad Saint Ambrose pours water from an object straight out of the record books. It's listed in the record books. A shell made of silver. It is quite possible that the painter depicted a fabric from China for the robe, no? Like the tela de canton listed in the inventories, akin to what was found on the parish ledgers, no? So you see how beautiful the painting of the way the robe was depicted, and that could even be a robe. He could have patterned it. The painter could have patterned it after an actual textile that would have been in the inventories. No. Next slide. Here, no, we can see the cereales. These are what the sacristans are holding. The cereales in the painting appear to bear distinctive decorative protuberances which evoke a particular design associated with Philippine church paraphernalia of the early 18th century. Apparently, the artist was depicting accessories from an earlier time, perhaps to evoke an antiquity befitting Saint Augustine. So even though he painted the painting in 1837, the style of the pieces that he depicted is from an earlier date. It is quite possible that Boljoon could have once had cereales with the wing-like ornamentation like those in the painting, because similarly adorned objects can be seen in other towns in the region, like Maribohok in Bohol, So you see the Maribohok monstrance base. Now, the monstrance was in the previous slide, but the base is on this slide on the lower left, and also the cross. And you can see that the lower part, you have this this design of with protuberances, which is common of silver church objects in the 18th century. Boljoon residents viewing Flavier Pablo's work may identify pieces which resembled what were listed in their inventories and used in their parish rituals. Next slide. This identification, this recognition of pieces that look like the pieces in their own church and which were in the inventories and which were used in their rituals, this identification may have inspired a feeling of connectedness, since the implication would be that a saintly figure like Saint Augustine had used the same type of objects. Likewise, this depiction would serve the additional function of rendering a historically and spatially distant figure more palpable by being surrounded by familiar items. You see, no? So, even though St. Augustine's baptism happened long ago, the objects that were being used are still being used in the objects depicted as being used in the painting are still used in the present day for the people, no, who looked at this painting, and therefore they could relate to what was happening to Saint Augustine. Conversely, parish rituals could now receive a new legitimization, since they were carried out with objects that were similar or were akin to those used by an actual saint. Diba? Pursuing this trajectory further, one may venture that the legitimization may even be enhanced if a sharp-eyed parishioner notices an object like the shell, that the shell is used not only in the St. Augustine baptism, but in the baptism of Christ as well. One will see the humble clam used in this manner in one Senson's magnificent Baptism of Christ, which is about late 19th century, from Angono in Rizal. This is the one Senson baptism, no? And in the close-up, you can see the shell, no? So as you can see, there was in the inventory there is listed a shell made of silver. And when you see that a similar object was used for Christ himself, then it really just makes a beautiful connection, no? Similar works may have existed in Cebu, no? As such, the link would now stretch from parish rituals in a small Visayan town all the way to Christ himself. Part 5, next slide. Reading the Boljoon facade. While the initial survey of records yielded no data on the facade, a reading can still be attempted of its many symbols. Next slide. As is expected, at the heart of the Boljoon facade is the alcove of the Patrocinio. The figure, which has its hands clasped in prayer, is carved in the round and is cone-shaped, a form associated with images of the Virgin from the nearby island of Bohol. The patrona stands on a base that supports 3 cherubs, another feature shared with some Bohol Virgin statues. The alcove is surrounded by an elaborate frame. It has a split tripartite pediment with a central piece bearing the monogram for Mary in the manner of the 18th century. The central piece is flanked by forms that mirror the horns on the first and second level entablatures of the main retablo. These forms also relate to the two inward curving shapes seen beside the bottom corners of the great triangle that crowns the church facade. No? So on the top left, you will see a protuberance or a finial in the retablo, which is irregular shape, which resembles the finials or horns of the Virgin's frame, and also is similar to the horns or finials on the church facade, on the top part of the church facade. Next slide. Comparing the Boljoon alcove frame with the central frame on Argao's facade, it will also be observed that while the Boljoon's nicho has a deep cave-like recess, Argao's is two-dimensional with the image of the town's patron, Saint Michael, carved in low relief. The Archangel, or Saint Michael, comes across as a mere representation, while the Boljoon patrona is tangibly present on the facade, as she is on the main retablo, a divine personage that has descended to keep watch over the earth. Next slide. It can be noted that the Patrocinio's nicho has a pair of corbel-like protuberances, no, which give one a sense that they are supporting something heavy. No, this is the below the pediment. No, there's something some kind of bracket, two brackets that are holding up the pediment. This feature, combined with the deep carving of the frame, as well as the deep hollowed out recess of the patron, where the patrona is standing, may indicate that the patrona's alcove has been patterned after an actual solid object, a three-dimensional object. The clue to what this object may have looked like can be found in Argao. Argao is the neighboring town, no? In Argao's Parish Museum. Here, an urna, or upper altar top house shrine was donated by a local family. So this is the urna on the left, on the right. This artifact is a good representative of pieces on which the Boljoon frame may have been based. Urnas of wood and polychrome are important features of traditional residences in Bohol Island, where they were set on home altars with statues of saints called santos placed inside them. They may have once been widespread in Cebu too. As such, they may have been widespread in Cebu too because this is evidenced by the urna in the Argao Museum, which is supposedly an heirloom of the local donor. As such, to the observer from Boljoon, the patrona in her facade alcove is not merely a flat illustration of a heavenly being. She is more like a beloved santo in a house shrine. Next slide. Moving on to the devices that flank the central alcove, one again encounters images of saints inside ornamental frames that have been lightly carved on the stone front. As identified by inscriptions, on the left is San Nicolas Tolentino with the sun on his breast, and on the right is San Juan Sahagun, holding up a chalice and host that symbolize the Eucharist. Next slide. On the bases of the altar pilasters are images of lions that are standing on their hind legs. That's one on the left. No? These are lions rampant, a heraldic device used in many European emblems. A closer look will reveal that both felines, hold balls in their hands. This detail, taken together with their facial feature, the facial feature of the lions, identify the lions as having been made in the Chinese manner. Above the rampant lions are long, thin images that have been identified as snakes. They may also be decoded as evoking the belt or the correa, which is one of the central symbols of an Augustinian devotion. Next slide. Still further up the pilaster are bunches of hanging fruit that could well be pomegranates. These fruits with their many seeds symbolize the rebirth after Christ's suffering. The seeds, kept so visibly snug by the surrounding skin, are, as well, likened to the congregation, protected within the walls of the church as mother and protected by the patrona. Next slide. Meanwhile, at the base of the inner pair of pilasters are images of a pelican striking its breast to draw the blood with which it will feed its young. This is a traditional Christian symbol alluding to Christ and also the church self-sacrifice to save humanity. This avian device actually has a strong link with the Boljoon's patroness because of the shared values of protection and nurturing. This is vividly illustrated by a passage from a 1664 book on the Patrocinio, or on the Virgin of Boljoon, but the Virgin on which the patroness of Boljoon is based, the Patrocinio de Maria, by the Jesuit priest Alonso de Andrade, wherein he likens the Virgin Mary under the title of Patrocinio to an eagle. He says, "It is with reason that the Empress of Heaven is compared to the imperial eagle, because the eagle, as Moses says, not only defends her children like other birds, but takes them on her wings and brings them to fly." It well may be because of treatises like Father Andrade's that the statue of Boljoon's protectress was provided with a gold eagle as listed in the 1795 inventory. One may presume that the eagle was sewn to the patrona's robe. Next slide. The comparison made between the Virgin and the imperial eagle brings to mind the double-headed bird in a book on display at the Basilica Museum in Cebu. Though usually associated with the Habsburg, whose rule in Spain ended in 1701, the two-headed eagle may as well evoke the resurgence of the Counter-Reformation, as well as the unstoppable spread of the word of Christ. So hindi lang ito Habsburg eagle, it is also a symbol of empire, of the unstoppable spread of the word of Christ. Next slide. The mention of the double-headed eagle and the pomegranate calls to mind how these symbols were used to decorate two of the ledgers for baptism. Diba? Earlier, no? Perhaps whoever created the decorations may have been aware of their symbolic links with what was being adorned. In other words, the baptistry registers, no? So it's not just an arbitrary decoration. There was really a meaning in the drawings that could be linked to the baptistry registers. Perhaps whoever, for pomegranate seeds may have signaled that the newly baptized were now members of the congregation. Meanwhile, the double eagle celebrated newly initiated subjects of both a universal church as well as a global empire. So there is meaning to these doodles after all, connected to the contents of the books that they were decorating. With this, the story has now come full circle. The records have helped to contextualize the ceremonial objects, the retablos, as well as the facade, and these in turn provide insights into the iconographic interpretations that help animate the old documents. Considering all these iconographic details, what then can be said of the symbolic program of the facade? Next slide. A facade is the public face of a building. It is the first thing that can be seen by foe and friend. In the case of Boljoon, one can sense a compelling message regarding the various aspects of sanctuary. One sees how fiercely the lion and the eagle fight to keep their loved ones safe. This must have been comforting for a community that had experienced attacks. One also sees the sacrifices of the pelican to feed its fledglings. Perhaps the parishioners are being reminded that in order to feel safe, one must be ready to work hard and be prepared, building forts and watchtowers on earth and in the heart. Meanwhile, the two saints add more nuances to the notion of sanctuary. San Nicolas Tolentino attracts with the sunshine of his sanctity, promising guidance and insight. San Juan assures with his offering of sustenance through the Eucharist. Everything must begin and end with the patrona. It is she who can do battle like the lion and the eagle. It is she who can nurture like the pelican, because she understands the oblation of the belt and the covenant of the pomegranate. Like the church itself, the patrona protects and cares for her people. Ultimately, what empowers her is the fact that she is right there with the people of Boljoon in her familiar urna, looking like she was standing on an altar at the very center of every home. And so the last part, a reading of Boljoon. Next slide. Yeah, yes, that's correct. That's correct. No, previous slide. Nasira tuloy ang yung flow ng aking lecture. This essay dealt mainly with one of the record series in the archives, the inventories. What is immediately made evident by perusing the objects listed in the ledgers is that much more can be gleaned when the documents are cross-indexed by observations framed by other disciplines, such as art history. Though cursory, this initial survey clarified how records were made in the context of a working parish in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial times. Contact between congregation and church was engendered by the sacraments, the cycle of celebrations, all of which required exchanges to take place between parishioners and priests, as well as their assistants. It was a result of these exchanges that records were born. The resulting documentation was collected in ledgers, which were then aggregated and reformatted as censuses. These became the basis for the information necessary for the machinations of the Spanish Empire. What this study also foregrounds is that aside from producing records, the administration of the sacraments and the performance of ceremonies also needed an array of objects ranging from robes with collars that varied per liturgical season to chalices for the distribution of the hosts. Conceivably, symbols could also confuse and occlude. Next slide. One more slide. Next slide. Rappaport and Cummins have pointed to the importance of considering visual cues together with documents in analyzing the workings of colonization. They have said, we take the implications of alphabetic and visual literacy to be inextricably entangled with an analysis of Spanish colonial documentation and how writing and pictorial expression functioned as both a measuring stick of cultural hierarchy in a colonial world and as a vehicle for incorporating native peoples into the colonial project. This underscores the idea that in interpreting records, one must also look at other sources for confirmation and interpretation. So we can see here that the large size of retablos mark them as important sites for decorative elements. Much was made in this essay of how the comparison of different altar pieces can provide frameworks for determining chronology. Yet even more important questions are generated. What was the agency behind the adoption and development of these decorative programs? Did the parishioners participate? Next slide. All the items listed in the inventory function to surround the parishioners with clouds of sights, textures, and sounds that delighted but also conscripted. They continuously recast parishioners as Hispanic colonial subjects who had to understand new worlds of cities with checkerboard street plans and documents with uniform formats which made up, and I quote, the nexus of lettered culture, state power, and urban location, end of quote, that Angel Rama had called La Ciudad Letrada, or the lettered city. Next slide. Rama had demonstrated that this city, this lettered city, which was the ultimate mechanism and manifestation of Spanish colonialism worldwide, was was, I quote again, social conciliation built on an ideology of the privacy of the written word. Within this system, the urban landscape was constituted as a literate scenario for indigenous conversion and combination, structuring the exercise of power by native actors and Spaniards alike. Legal documents function as prime vehicles for transforming native perceptions of time, space, and the discourses of power. End of quote. The present essay has tried to show the importance of parish ritual life and their attendant terms and objects in Rama's Nexus. Next slide. This is a graffito of a ship found in one of the buildings in Cebu. No? Then again, it was not just the iconography that articulated and therefore supported the requirements of colonization. The materials themselves, the very stuff from which the church paraphernalia were made, already heralded the global might of the Catholic Church. Some statues were given the label Hechura de Manila, a designation that signaled preferential valuation for being associated with the primate city, even while others were ordinario. And this is also this term is from the inventory, perhaps because they were locally sourced. To continue in this vein, there were benches that were described as antiguo, which were contrasted with those that were moderno. Again, this pair of adjectives comes from the inventory. In this way, hierarchies were created on the pages of the inventories themselves, with implications for the configuring of taste and fashion, which continued beyond the Spanish colonial period. Did these hierarchies and the reactions to them cause a word like hechura, which in Spanish originally meant appearance or workmanship, to become an expletive along the lines of who do you think you are? Because today when we say tsura mo lang, you're really saying who do you think you are? So how did this meaning come from the meaning of hechura, which is workmanship, which is appearance? And I'm suggesting that it has something to do with the context where the word hechura was often found, which is in inventories, no? Because the fact that a hierarchy was created by objects that were hechura de Manila, and thereby implying that the things that were not hechura de Manila were not as valuable. This kind of valuing and the reaction to it caused maybe some kind of resentment, which led to the idea that if someone was pretending to be of a certain value or of a certain rank higher than what he really had, then the appropriate term was to say, tsura mo lang, who do you think you are? Next slide. Some colonial subjects, such as the escribiente de la iglesia, mastered the language well enough to be able to take part in governance. They helped produce documents in universal formats that made administration easier. They may even have participated in producing an iconographic program as the fanciful images of the pomegranates and the eagles suggest. The book of accounts will show that the escribiente was not the only one who worked in the church, in the proximity of records as well as the ceremonial articles and the linguistic cloud that enveloped them. There were sacristans, cantores, laundresses, and organ players whose ears were probably attuned not only to foreign melodies, but also to gossip. Clearly, half-remembered dialogues in the priest counters would have myriad channels by which to reach the rest of the townspeople. Whatever one's degree of familiarity and involvement with church articles, these ritual objects as well as the inventories that enumerated them together with the other records which facilitated parish administration, were clearly components of a colonial mechanism that homogenized as well as alienated. This process, however, could not continue in one direction forever. Rappaport and Cummins also spoke of how, I quote, colonial subjects created new forms of expression whose character can only be discerned in its dialogue with European expressive forms and technologies of inscription. End of quote. This dialogue implied that just as the exchanges were reshaping the colonized, there could also have been instances when the colonizers were themselves affected. At the very least, the visual elements and the records themselves were being transformed by their subjects in subtle, quiet ways that were able to slip through the cracks in the palisades of imperial vigilance, like the lagang and the pasticum. Next slide. Next slide. Today, records and other items for the Spanish period are often in a decrepit condition because of decades of neglect. This story state may contribute further to the perception that church documents and objects are no longer of use and no longer accessible, not only because they are fragile, but because they are associated with texts that are in a language of a vanished era. Next slide. This feeling of inaccessibility likewise fuels the narrative of loss which prevails in many churches. Everywhere one looks in Boljoon, one is reminded of what is no longer there. A niño dormido that now sleeps elsewhere, and a luminous painting that is known only in photographs. It bears stressing that what is lost to the community when such objects are taken away is not just the wholeness of the fabric of parish ceremonial life, but the proximity to a thing of beauty and meaning. Next slide. What all these suggest is that inventories are not just about objects. They are also about language, perceptions, and cultural exchanges. They are also about the transformation of lives. Next slide. Daghang salamat and happy Independence Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director Manalo, for that very wonderful lecture. We have learned so much from it. And happy Independence Day as well. We've also learned, Director Manalo, that your birthday is on the 15th. So,
sana anong inventory yung nakuha? Saan na inventory nakuha mo yan?
Sa archives din po, Director. Advance happy birthday po.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay po. Okay, so I think we still have time for to accommodate a few questions. So if you have questions in relation to the lecture of Director Manalo, you can type in on the Q&A button on your Zoom, or you can also type in your questions on the comment section on Facebook Live. All right, I believe we already have a number of questions here, Director Manalo.
I look at them in the Q&A.
I will look at them and I will ask the question.
Okay.
Sige po. For your, para po, di po kayo masyado mahirapan.
Go ahead.
Sige, sir. Okay, first question is, how would you describe the current state of preservation of the Boljoon records? And is the National Archives of the Philippines providing assistance in the management of the parish colonial records?
Right now, we're not. We have done an initial survey. Some of them are quite deteriorated, though there is some attempt to do initial conservation, and this was done by the people from the University of San Carlos, and I think also from the National Historical Commission. This is something that we will look into, and we can look into, because these records are associated with the Church of Boljoon, which is a national cultural treasure.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that. There's another question.
I might be wrong. No? The ones who had previously put up the museum, I am not so sure if it was. Surely it was the University of San Carlos, but I don't know if their partner was National Museum or NHCP. Oh, next question.
Sir. Okay, sir. Someone is asking po, if personally, if you have what for you is the most impressive treasure of Boljoon?
Siyempre pang Miss Universe ang sagot dan, di ba? Na
yes, po.
They're all impressive in their own way. No?
That's right.
But I would maybe point to the mandorlas, no, or what is called saksak, because it uses local materials such as lagang and the saksak, which is this mandorla, the oval frames, no, or almond-shaped frames. These are made out of a local material. So I am very impressed by these. No?
Okay, sir. Thank you for that. Another question is, do you think that the colonial records of Boljoon have enough merit to be declared national cultural treasures by the National Archives of the Philippines?
Well, as you know, the naming of a national cultural treasure is something that is subject to consultation. No? So it's something that would need to be consulted with several levels of experts. No? But certainly, it's certainly very important, no? Because
yes.
As I've already shown, it records terms, it records the existence of pinya, the names for different kinds of cloth which we no longer know. It even dates a work by Severino Flavier Pablo, no? And other points like this, no. Aside from, of course, being a record of faith and no, of the people's faith, or the story of the people of Boljoon.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that. Another question is, how would you describe the record system used by parishes during the Spanish colonial era, and how is their system similar or different to today's modern practices in records management?
Well, the records are still based. Their records are what are strictly records that they hold are still use the basic principle, which is that they are documents which provide evidences of transactions. No? In this case, between the parishioners and the parish administration, and also between the parish administration and the higher levels of administration, such as that of the diocese. No, so in many ways, I think these are still their practices are still related to us, but to a large extent, a lot of what they're doing also is to prepare materials that can be aggregated, information that can be aggregated to compose surveys. By the way, with regard to preserving the records, no, I'm happy to say that the people of the parish, no, led by their parish priests, are also taking care of what they have. As you can see, they have already set up a parish museum, and they have preserved the oldest records in this parish museum. No? So the people are very eager to learn and have so much to share, or there's so many things that they know themselves. No, they're very interested. The people are very interested in their history, and that, I think, is the beginning of preservation. This concern for history, this concern for heritage. No?
That's good to know, Director Manalo. There's an involvement actually of the community as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You can see that they're very proud of what they have, no,
mm-hmm.
and of course, and sad about what is no longer there, no.
Yes. Mm-hmm. There's another question here, Director. Considering the existing ecclesiastical artifacts and treasures of Boljoon. How would you describe the economic status of the parish during that time? Perhaps he's pertaining during Spanish colonial era.
My understanding, though I'm not too sure, no. My understanding is that Boljoon was one of the smaller parishes, and it certainly it was small, and it was I believe smaller than Argao and Dalaget. But the reason I'm not sure is because many of the objects they have are quite wonderful, no? And these objects would be something that you would expect from a more well-to-do parish, no? But I think, on the other hand, there are many things in the Argao Museum, for example, that are quite of a very fine level too. No, so, and in fact, there's a lot of things that are incredible in the neighboring Argao Museum. So it does seem that Argao really was a bigger parish than Boljoon.
That's right. There's another question here, Director. If there are data on the retablo makers?
No, none. I mean, this is just an initial study. No, I haven't really gone to archives in Spain, for example, or the Agustinian archives in Valladolid, or even to many of the other archives here in the Philippines. So I've not found any materials. No, in fact, that's why I cite not the records of the parish, but the early 17th century, 1600s record that was found in one of the libraries of the United States, and which talks about Chinese artisans being asked to make a retablo for the town of Siniloan in Laguna, no? And this is the research of the scholar Potay, no, Dr. Potay. So, but in terms of the records of Boljoon, we can't really say.
All right, thank you for that, Director. I think there's a concerned citizen here. He or she is asking, how can an ordinary person or a citizen help the National Archives of the Philippines or the Boljoon Parish in the preservation of their colonial records?
I think the very first thing that one can do is show an interest in these things, no? By visiting the museum, by perhaps volunteering to help out in the museum, and just to convey one's concern for these things. I mean, not necessarily. Please don't complain or anything like that, no? Because as in many cases, no, the priest who has a lot of other things to do, is really trying his best to take care of the parish heritage, and there are many people who are helping him, no. But surely, just showing an interest is the beginning, and then on the other hand, collecting related or collecting heritage information coming from your town will really help, no. And this includes stories, collecting stories about the church. For example, I cut it out of my lecture, but there is a legend in Boljoon that the church was actually built by a giant, no, that carried logs and big stones, and because it is a legend, and just like many other legends, there is an insight, or there is a perception that is deep inside this legend, which is that there is the perception that the church is quite an amazing piece of architecture, is an amazing building. That is why the idea that it must have been built by giants, no? So collecting stories like this can add to enrich the heritage of one's town, the heritage of one's church, and this is something that this can already be a contribution, no. In fact, much of what I was able to write was based on the research of local of the people of the townspeople of Boljoon, who found, for example, certain documents which they shared with me and which I asked them to which I got their permission to study and write about. I remember one young man named Vitex Cooley who helped me study these records and helped me translate these records so that I was able to report on them. No, but there are many other records, no, which that people can read, can study for themselves. And by the way, the National Archives conducts what we call the local community workshops, no, in archives workshops, wherein we teach community members to organize community archives, because of the idea that the records, the community must participate in deciding what will go into their archives, so that it's not just official records, but even records like legends, stories, narratives of people in the war during the Second World War, or other narratives, and also information about planting, harvesting, and even cooking. So we have this local community archives project. No,
That's good to know, Director.
Though it is in the pilot stage, no, so we're just selecting. We're just pre-selecting certain strategic towns, usually those that are associated with national cultural treasures, that we are holding pilot workshops in. It's not yet a project that's open to the general public.
Thank you for that, Director Manalo. There's a question here. I hope you don't mind, Director. We still have a number of questions here.
Sure, go ahead.
From our attendees. I think they're very much interested in the history of Boljoon. Are there any objects in Boljoon that was directly sourced or has something to do with the galleon trade?
Well, that's the thing, no? I mean, if you read the inventories, they're just full of beautiful fabrics and wonderful names like tampotes, lampaso, that talk about the galleon trade, especially because you can identify pieces that the fabrics that come from China. No, there is the tela de Canton, there is tela de Pekin, no. So you can see Canton and Peking are mentioned, and then there is also Piña. So you can see the blending of all the different elements from China, the Philippines, and then the Americas, no, Nueva España, because that is which is where pineapple comes from, to be brought to the Philippines to become a fabric in the Philippines, no. So sure, clearly just the mention, the names and the mention of the fabrics, no, that but aside from that, also you'll see tela merino, which is a kind of wool. So you see really the coming together of the whole world through fabrics.
I agree that there's a connection po talaga, no, with the South America, particularly the piña. Okay. There's another question here, Director Manalo. Given the current state of archival management in the Philippines, would you agree to the regulation of the practice by the government? Should archiving be a regulated profession? I think this is something to do with archiving na po.
Well, that's certainly something that should be considered. No, I mean, just like so many other professions have not so much regulation but certifications. That is something that can be considered, especially with different archival groups or archival associations, and also with the NCCA Committee on Archives.
Okay. Is the Archdiocese, Director Manalo, involved in the management of the colonial treasures of Boljoon?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, here in Manila, for one thing, the Archdiocese of Manila has one of the most important. It has one of the most important collections of records in the Philippines. No, the Archdiocesan Archives of Manila is really one of the greatest archives in the country. No, but we've also, for example, declared as a national cultural treasure the records of the Archdiocese of Nueva Segovia, or the Vegan Archdiocese, the Ilocos Archdiocese. No? Now, in terms of Cebu, of course, the tragedy is that the cathedral in Cebu was bombed, no, during the Second World War. So many things were lost, but definitely. The people of Cebu and of the archdiocese, the priesthood, no, and the parishioners of Cebu, or the people of Cebu, are very active in church heritage preservation. No, they're very active. They're really quite they're on the forefront really of the drive for preserving church art and church objects, no, along with many archdioceses, especially many dioceses, such as, for example, the Diocese of Bohol. The Diocese of Bohol, with people like Father Ted Toralba, they're really pioneers in church preservation.
That's good to know. I think Father Ted was also one of our resource speakers here in the Intramuros Learning Sessions.
Extremely knowledgeable.
That's good to know. There's a question here in relation to the Boljoon Church. To what would you attribute the choice of the site of the Boljoon Church, considering it is so many meters away from the shore and that it faces the sea, the wind? It's prone to elements and typhoons directly with no natural protection. Any comment on that, Director?
None really. I haven't thought about it, but I mean, right offhand, I would say that there is some value to being right on the beach, no, where so much interactions are going on, no, with the coming of boats, etc. And you can see that there is also some protection, I suppose, from the elements because of the mountain, the mountains at the back and on the side, no. Of course, we have examples like Lobok in Bohol, where what used to be the mother house of the Jesuits in Bohol, but it used to be on the shore of Bohol, near the shore in Baclayon, but it moved up the river to Lobok, which was considered a safer place.
Okay, thank you for that, Director. Are there any plans to digitize the archives? If so, would there be copyright for the digitized copies, even if these records are from the colonial era?
Well, it would be too early to really talk about what would be the arrangements that we would enter into, no? But certainly we would be open to that. But it's something that we will still have to discuss with the parish priest and, of course, the bishop, the Archbishop of Cebu. We have not had a chance to discuss it at all, partially because of the pandemic. But it's something that would still need to be studied. By the way, I mentioned Father Ted earlier. Of course, the bishops of Bohol have also been very supportive about caring for programs that care for diocesan heritage resources. No.
That's good to know, po. And how can ordinary people nominate important archival artifacts as national cultural treasures? Can you comment on this, Director? Perhaps I think. Yeah.
I mean, certainly one can write us, no, but ideally, if I understand the law about these things, which is 166, but the process that is laid out is that that the owner of the collection to be nominated, or the whatever is to be nominated, the owner themselves should write to the relevant agency. If it's a church building, or it could either be it would be the NCCA, or the National Historical Commission. If it's a historical site, it's the National Historical Commission. If it's artworks, it would be the NCCA. And if it's archives, it would be us, no, the National Archives. But the idea is that the owner should contact us and indicate a willingness to be nominated, no, so that, di ba, ang hirap naman yan, mag-designate ka o mag-nominate ka, yung pala yung may-ari ayaw, no, because of course there are also while the national government, if something is declared a national treasure, the national government then has obligations and may then support, or not support, but may then assist in the care of these declared treasures. But of course, the owner of the piece of the national cultural treasure also has obligations.
Thank you for that, Director. There's a question here from Reverend Father Ricardo Macalino. Director Manalo, salamat po at magandang makabuluhang pagbabahagi. Ang question po niya is, na-mention daw po yung Chinese motif present in the parishes of Maria de Patrocinio de Boljoon. May indication daw po ba of a Chinese community sa Boljoon po during the 18th century?
I have not come across that, but as I said, very cursory pa, initial pa lang yung aking pag-aaral. Ang alam ko lang is yung merong may sinulat dati yung aking guro na si Ginoong Santiago Albano Pilar. May sinulat siya sa CCP Encyclopedia of Philippine Art hinggil sa isang grupo ng mga Chinese or Chinese trained artists who lived in Bohol, no? But malamang meron naman yun kasi mas malaking bayan talaga ang Cebu City, no? And maraming mga marks, maraming, as katulad sa sinabi ko sa aking panayam, maraming mga bakas ng mga artisans na Chino sa mga natitirang gusali sa Cebu, no, katulad ng Jesuit House of 1730. Marami na nang nagpuna na mukhang gawa ito ng mga tao na may alam tungkol sa mga teknolohiya ng mga Chino, kung hindi sila mga Chinese mismo.
Okay, but thank you for that. I think we're down to our last 2 to 3 questions. So, is the geographical context of Boljoon reflected in any of the artifacts presented po?
Well, certainly, its proximity to the sea is reflected by, the presence of objects made of lagang, or which is a seashell, and its proximity to rivers, no, or to stands of nipa are reflected by the appearance in its collection of objects like the mandorla frames made of saksak, or the inner part of the nipa palm, no? As well as, of course, even just wood. Wood is also taken from the forest, the nearby forests, no, and other things like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that po. How is Boljoon protected from illegal trafficking of cultural properties? Would you like to comment on that, Director?
As I said, the people are much more aware now of caring for their heritage, no? And the priests are now the present priests are, of course, very interested in taking care of the heritage resources of the parish. But of course, this is in connection and is always taken together with the evangelical or the church concerns, no, the objectives of the main objectives of the church. And but the basic protection, and then we must also cite, of course, the fact that they now have a parish museum that was established a number of years ago to really have a place to take care of these things, and they are in touch with national agencies. But I think the basis really of the protection is RA 166, no, which provides legislation that takes care of that protects, no, basically protects heritage resources.
Okay, thank you for that, Director. Does the National Archives of the Philippines have a national registry of significant archival treasures or depositories in the Philippines?
Not yet. We hope to work on that.
Okay. There's a last question here. Director Manalo,
I said we hope to work on that, but we have already begun declaring national cultural treasures. No? So we have done it. We have declared national treasures, but we don't have a complete listing.
No listing yet. Okay. Okay, pa. Aside from the Boljoon, Jovi Miro is asking if there's any other, if you have any current research po. I think he's very much interested in your studies.
I'm very interested as well in the churches of Bohol, of course, no, especially Baclayon. By the way, I'm not from Bohol. Bohol is not my hometown, in the sense that my mother's family is really from Negros, no. I'm really Ilonggo, though of course my father is from Nueva Ecija, no. But I have a house in Baclayon, no, and I love Baclayon, no? And I love Bohol. Anyway, but I'm also working. That's why, because of my interest, really is of course many of the churches of Bohol, but which unfortunately many of them were damaged by the 2013 earthquake. But you will be amazed at the work of the National Historical Commission, our sister agencies, the NHCP and the National Museum under under Secretary Jeremy Barnes, and under the NHCP under Dr. Rene Escalante. They have done amazing work to restore the churches. It's wonderful what they've done, and but they're really one of these churches, the Church of the Bok, is something that I'm very interested in. I've also published an article. What I'm studying in Lubbock is really the side entrance, or the sacristy entrance. There's a carving on top of that, no, and but actually I'm not so sure yet. I have not even approached it recently because so much of it was covered by rubble from the earthquake. But I've also been studying and I've written a long article that was published in the same journal, the Philippine Quarterly of Culture and Society of the University of San Carlos. I've written another article that was published in that journal, like this lecture, like the essay on which this lecture is based. I've written an article on Binangonan Church, especially one particular side retablo of this church, which is incredible.
Thank you for sharing that, Director Manalo.
But in general, I've also been researching on the churches of Laguna de Bai. I really love going around Laguna de Bai, and it was he just died very recently, the late Professor Santiago Albano Pilar, who first introduced me to the churches of Laguna de Bai. But so much also of what I am sharing today, I learned from trying to follow. I'm not sure if I deserve to, but trying to follow in the footsteps of Regalado Trota Jose.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Director Manalo, for answering the questions. I think we have a number of questions this afternoon. Those were asking for a copy of this lecture. Please note that this will be recorded and will be uploaded on IA's YouTube channels, so you can review if you have clarifications.
But
you can
I hope
yeah.
they do not use any of the photos used, no?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Especially because some of them are not mine. No?
Okay, that's been noted, Director
Most of
Manalo.
them are. I mean, practically everything. Most of the pictures are taken by me, but some are not. No, so I would not have I cannot authorize sharing them with other people.
Yes. Okay. So please don't share. Okay. Thank you, Director
Or publish,
Manalo.
no? Do not share or publish. No? Well, I think that's prohibited.
Yes, definitely.
But anyway, what did you think of the lecture? Was it helpful, or what? Do you have any comment?
We're very happy with the lecture because it's very comprehensive, particularly on understanding the treasures of Boljoon. I think it's the first time that we were able to get all the intricate details as well as of the churches, of the collections and the archives. So we're very excited. Actually, we're very pleased to know that there's actually hope in the provinces in terms of archivals and research and interest in history and heritage.
I mean, in many ways, the provinces feed us, no, in these activities, no, and certainly one cannot really compare. I mean, there are much. There's a lot of knowledge which our sisters and brothers in the provinces.
Yes, definitely.
Have, no, that we do not know about, that we in the cities do not know about, and that's why it's important to move around, no. And certainly in Boljoon, there's people working with the mayor, people working with the parish priest, and several organizations that are concerned about and familiar with their heritage. No? And in fact, much of what I was able to share today is derived from the knowledge of the people of Boljoon who I interviewed. No?
It's good to know, Director Manalo, that the people of Boljoon are also involved. They're very much passionate, and I think it's probably their advocacy to protect their history and heritage as well.
Yes. When I lectured about this in Cebu, I had a chance to, when I lectured about this in Cebu with the Archdiocese, no, I was invited by the people of Boljoon to go to Boljoon after this to give the same lecture in Boljoon Church, no? And there were many people who attended. It was organized by Mr. Ronald Villanueva and the people and his friends, no? The people he was working with.
Okay. Thank you very much, Director Manalo. A lot of
thank you
comments
also.
here.
Thank you too.
It's a very informative lecture. We will be sharing with you the online feedback form. We think a lot of positive comments will be.
Yeah, but will I have a chance to look at the questions?
Yes, of course, yes.
The chat.
There's
the messages.
On the Q&A button, Director, you can take a look if you would like to answer more questions.
Yes, somebody just mentioned the work of Mr. Paul Gershwiller, no, on Boljoon. That is one of the sources that I'm sorry, I forgot to mention it. It's mentioned in my essay, and of course, footnoted. No, Mr. Paul Gershwiller, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, wrote 2 books on Boljoon. No.
Yes. Okay.
And this was these books were published by Aboitiz Foundation.
Yeah.
So what do I do after this session ends? Would I be able to look at the question and answer or the chat, or hindi na?
I'm afraid it will be mawala na rin po siya sa after the lecture of the once we end the Zoom session. So we would have to, I think, maybe do a screenshot of the questions if you would like to answer pa po yung some of the questions here.
Sure. And the chat, can you do that, Rancho? Hi, Rancho. Thank you again for inviting me.
Director, we will be sending you a complete report, including all the questions and the chats. So
okay, great.
We're currently...
Natulog ka ata habang nagle-lecture ako nawala ka.
siya po yung nag-next slide.
Ganun pa. Okay. Kaya nga napansin ko natutulog siya kasi pag nagsabi ako next slide, hindi ka agad na napapalitan. No, but I think there's really a delay, no?
Yes po. May lag po
May lag. Oo.
Yes po. Okay.
And pasensya ka na, no? Hindi na, after a while, hindi na ako nagsasabi, please, next slide na lang.
Okay lang, Direk. Naintindihan na po namin. Okay po. Alright,
okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Rancho. And thank you to our big boss of IA, Mr. Attorney Asido.
Okay po. Standby lang po kayo dyan, Director Manalo. Hingi pa po namin yung final worship po. Konting patalastas lang po muna kami. A few announcements lang po. So this ends the lecture of Director Manalo for the episode 57 of the Intramuros Learning Sessions. But before we end, again, we would like to invite the public to subscribe or like the social media accounts of the Intramuros Administration. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on YouTube. So we will upload the video here, and please do not use the photos as requested by Director Manalo. Okay, if you missed any of the previous sessions, you can type bit.ly/IAILS, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you can be updated on the uploaded videos and lectures of the Intramuros Learning Sessions. Okay, so we're also on Google Arts and Culture. The ecclesiastical art of the Intramuros Administration has been uploaded. It's been also updated, so please search the keywords Intramuros Administration on Google Arts and Culture. We're also requesting everyone to support again Intramuros to become Asia's leading tourist attraction this year, 2021. The instructions are there. Click or visit worldtravel.awards.com/vote, and please register, confirm your account, cast your vote, and please choose Intramuros Philippines. It's very important for us to be recognized again this year so that there will be more people supporting and coming to Intramuros. And we need
Intramuros ba, hindi Boljoon?
Pwede rin, sir.
I'm just joking.
Pwede po natin i-vote for next year. Okay pa. Okay, but we also have a number of learning sessions this month. Kung napapansin nyo, marami po tayong lectures because we would like to involve the public in heritage and conservation as well as history, not just of Intramuros, but as well of other places in the Philippines, including Boljoon, of course, which is the lecture for this afternoon. On June 18, we invite you for the lecture of Francisco Leongson, Letra na Philippine National Treasure, which is still in Intramuros. On the 24th, Araw ng Manila, we have the Estilong Praile architectural character of the 5 religious orders in the Philippines as observed by architect Richard Bautista. And on the 26th, we have Pamanahon, digitally reconstructing pre-war Intramuros. This will be presented by Prince Vico of the U State College of Architecture. Okay, so we have 3 Intramuros learning sessions lined up. Okay, Director Manalo, any final words before we end the session?
Yeah, I guess I just again want to thank everyone who made this lecture possible, and especially Jeffrey, Rancho, and Attorney Asido. And thank you for all the people who came. And thank you for all your comments. I really appreciate them. You know, very rare. I mean, that's what's wonderful about Zoom. No, you finally hear what you can finally have some sense of what people are thinking, what you just lectured about. By the way, Rancho and Jeffrey, you know, this is the very first time I've ever tried lecturing with slides but that I wrote my lecture beforehand. No. And you can imagine, I was telling you, I was getting so stressed trying to cut it down from about 150 or so slides and about 70 pages to about the size of what we deliver today. So it was quite long. Thank you for allowing me to speak for an extended period, a full period. But it's really incredible to finally get feedback about it. So that's really something. I just want to stress here, that that it's very important to understand church objects, the context of church object as church objects as accessories for worship and faith, and also to understand their sacred context. But it's also quite important to see these things as from the context of art and society, and the social context as well, no, to understand the social context. And I've tried to show in this study that these objects and the inventories have meaning, especially when they're read against the grain, when you don't simply take the obvious meaning, but also look for other meanings and make and theorize, because so much of what I have said are theories. No? I mean, you still have to check records, really try to find records to affirm this. It may turn out that the church was made in the retablo was made in 1780 or so, in the late 18th century, rather than the earlier date which I proposed. No, that could very well be the case, and so forth and so on. No, but I just want to say that it's important to use the methods not only of history and of history, no, but also of art history to understand art objects. And I've tried to show also that by cross-referencing records with other objects, other things, other places, no, you get so much more. You get to understand so much more.
Maraming salamat po, Director Manalo, and Happy Independence Day po.
Happy Independence Day.
We really appreciate po your knowledge and the time po that you've shared with us. It's a long lecture, but still very fruitful pa rin po.
Okay.
Thank you.
Happy birthday din po, Director.
Oh, thank you po. Thank you.
Alright.
Ka-birthday ko, kamunti ko na ka-birthday yung Bible stand or a trill ng Lubok, di ba? June 17.
Oo nga po eh.
Imagine, no? May date siya, tapos 1776.
Yes.
Just a few months before the declaration, before the Independence Day of the United States, no? July 4, 1776.
That's true.
So imagine, no? Habang nangyayari yan dun sa Amerika, ganito naman nangyayari sa atin with this Bible stand or a trill, no? Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director, may pahabol na question po si Ferdinand Pangaw. Kung meron, if National Archives have public programs, such as today's activity that they can engage in.
We are looking into more interpretative activities like this, no? But we generally try not to. I mean, we do it sometimes, which is why we produce books, no, with essays, etc. But generally, we really have to concentrate on the records themselves and on records management, because we leave the interpretation to other agencies, no.
Okay.
But of course we do training on records management. We do training now on community archives. We did, by the way, do a Zoom video conferencing seminar on museum design using archival materials, no, which was very well received. But as I said, the main agencies that really are involved with art history and interpretation of history, these agencies are National Museum, the NCCA, and NHCP.
Okay. Great.
But we may have a big conference lined up this year We'll tell you more about it once we've firmed it up.
Okay po, abangan po namin yung Director. Again,
Okay.
maraming salamat po. Maraming salamat po, Director Manalo. Maraming salamat po sa lahat po na umattend sa Zoom. More than 100
Yeah, thank
po.
you so
And
much.
sa Facebook Live. So well attended po ang ating lecture this afternoon.
Rancho has sent me the names and kung taga saan yung mga ang mga nag-sign in sa QA, no? Sa their questions and sa chat din, ha?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Okay po.
If that's possible.
Yes po.
Thank you, Gid. Thank you, Gid. Damo gid na
Salamat
salamat.
po.
Daghan salamat.
Po.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye po.
So I can leave na, no?